You're marrying him?" The banker's laugh cut across the room. "Caleb Hawthorne doesn't own enough to bury himself." Anna Whitmore looked the man dead in the eye, picked up her father's debt papers from his desk, and walked out without another word. She had refused Raymond Coulter's money. She had refused the banker's pity. And now she was riding north into the mountains beside a quiet cowboy in a worn jacket whom the whole valley called the poorest man in the county, and she felt, for the first time since her father died, like she was finally choosing her own life. She had no idea what was waiting on the other side of that mountain. If this story has found you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Anna's journey all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning her father was buried, Anna Whitmore stood at the edge of the cemetery and counted exactly how many people had come to pay their respects. 11, including herself, including Reverend Cole, who had already told her privately that he hoped she would settle the matter of the church donation her father had promised before the end of the month. That was when she knew what her father's death truly meant in this town. Not grief, not honor, not memory, debt. Her father, Thomas Whitmore, had been a proud man in the way that broke families quietly over years rather than loudly in a single moment. He borrowed against the farm when the cattle prices dropped. He borrowed again when the drought came. He told Anna each time that things would turn around, that Montana land was worth holding on to, that a Whitmore did not surrender what his grandfather had built with his own 2 hands. Thomas Whitmore died in his sleep on a Tuesday in June without seeing things turn around. He left behind 160 acres of farmland along the Bitterroot River, a farmhouse that needed a new roof, 4 horses, 32 cattle, and a debt to the First Territorial Bank of Helena that Anna had not known the full size until the bank's man showed up at the cemetery before her father's body was even cold in the ground. His name was Gerald Fitch. He wore a brown suit that was too heavy for summer and carried a leather satchel that he kept pressed against his ribs like something precious lived inside it. He waited until the Reverend finished his final prayer. Then he walked across the grass toward Anna with the calm, deliberate movement of a man who had done this many times before and felt no particular guilt about any of it. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "my condolences for your loss. When you have a moment, I'd like to discuss the outstanding balance on your father's account with the bank." Anna looked at him for a long moment. Her hands were folded in front of her, her jaw was set in the way her mother used to call her stubborn look, and her father used to call her thinking look. "My father was buried 20 minutes ago," she said. "Yes," Fitch said, "and the note comes due in 60 days. She did not cry in front of Gerald Fitch. She had already decided that before he crossed the grass toward her, she would not give him or the bank or this town the satisfaction of seeing her break. She stood straight and she listened while he explained the numbers in the flat, careful voice of a man reading from a ledger, and when he was finished, she told him she understood and she would be in touch. Then she walked home alone, sat at her kitchen table, and read through every piece of paper her father had left in the wooden box he kept under his bed. The debt was $4,200. She had $47 in the household tin and a farm that would take 2 strong men and a full season to run at any kind of profit. She was 24 years old and she was alone and she had 60 days. The first solution came from her mother's sister, Harriet, who rode out from town 3 days after the funeral with a covered dish and an agenda. "You need to think practically," Harriet said, setting the dish on the table and sitting down without being invited. "Raymond Coulter has already asked about you." Anna kept her eyes on the window. "Raymond Coulter is 53 years old and has buried 2 wives. Raymond Coulter owns the largest cattle operation between here and Missoula," Harriet said. "He's offering to clear the debt entirely and let you keep living on this land." "As his wife, of course." Anna turned from the window. "As his property, you mean?" "Anna." Harriet's voice dropped into the tone of a woman who believed she was being reasonable. "You are a young woman alone on a failing farm with a debt you cannot pay. What exactly do you believe your options are?" "I haven't finished finding them yet." Harriet left the covered dish and took her agenda back to town with her. and Anna spent the rest of the day working what she knew. She was not a foolish woman. She understood numbers. Her father had taught her the books because he had no son, and believed, in his stubborn, quiet way, that a woman who understood a ledger could survive almost anything. He had not been wrong, but understanding a ledger did not make the numbers in it smaller. She rode into town the following week and spoke to the bank directly. The manager, a man named Aldous Pryor, who had known her father for 20 years, looked genuinely sorry while explaining that the bank's position had not changed. The note was the note, 60 days, or the bank would begin the process of foreclosure. Is there nothing, Anna said carefully, that could be arranged? An extension? A reduced payment schedule? Pryor folded his hands on the desk. Miss Whitmore, I have extended your father's account 3 times in the past 4 years. The board has made clear that I cannot extend it again. I'm sorry, I truly am. She believed him. That almost made it worse. She rode back along the river road, with the afternoon sun pressing hot against her shoulders, and she thought about what she actually had. The house itself was the largest asset, but selling it would mean losing the land, and likely not clearing the full debt anyway. Not in 60 days, the cattle could bring something. The horses, but not enough. Not close enough. She was still thinking when she heard someone behind her on the road. She turned in the saddle. A man on a gray horse had pulled up about 20 yards back, watching her with the patient stillness of someone who had been following her trail for a while, and was in no particular hurry. He wore a worn canvas jacket that had seen more seasons than she could count, a hat pulled low against the sun, and boots that had walked more miles than most men in this county ever would. He was not a young man, but he was not old either. Somewhere in between, in the way that hard outdoor work aged a face and hands but kept the body strong. His jaw was clean-shaved, which she noticed, because most men who lived far from town did not bother. He had dark eyes that were watching her with a directness that was not rude but was completely unafraid. You're Thomas Whitmore's daughter, he said. Not a question. I am, Anna said. And you are Caleb Hawthorne. He said it simply. Without decoration, the way a man states a fact that does not require explanation. I heard about your father. I'm sorry. Did you know him? A little. He was a fair man. He paused. I heard about the bank situation too. Anna straightened in her saddle. In a town this size, she supposed she should not have been surprised. Then you know more about my business than I'm comfortable with. Probably, he said, without any particular embarrassment. I won't pretend otherwise. I've been thinking about something, and I'll say it plainly, because I don't know another way to say it. You need a solution to the debt problem. I need a wife. I'm told those two things sometimes line up. Anna stared at him. He held her gaze without looking away. You're proposing marriage, she said. To a woman you've never spoken to before this moment. I'm proposing a conversation, he said, about whether marriage might make sense for both of us. Those are different things. She had 100 reasons to turn her horse around and ride home. She knew none of them were the kind of reasons that solved $4,200 of debt in 60 days. You'd better start talking, she said. They sat their horses on the side of the river road for the better part of an hour while Caleb Hawthorne said what he had come to say. He was not a man who used words for decoration. He said he had land in the mountains, north of the main valley, past where most people traveled. He said he had no family and no one at home, and he had reached the point in his life where a man noticed the silence too much. He said he could pay her father's debt in full and give her a home and a life without need if she would agree to come north with him and be his wife in the genuine sense of the word. Not a business arrangement with a woman kept at a distance. What do you mean, genuine sense? Anna asked. I mean a real marriage, he said. Not a contract. I want a partner. A woman who takes her place in a home as someone who belongs there, not someone who tolerates being there. And what does that look like? Exactly. In practical terms. He thought about it for a moment, which she respected. He was not giving her practiced answers. It means you have a say in how things run, he said finally. It means what you think matters. It means I don't treat you like something I bought. But you would be paying my debt, Anna said. That's a transaction no matter how you describe it. Starting a life is always a transaction of some kind, he said. Two people deciding to bet on each other. I'm being honest about the shape of ours. I think that's better than pretending it's something it isn't. She looked at him for a long time. He sat very still on his horse, not filling the silence with more words, which she found she appreciated more than she expected to. People in town say you're poor, she said. Something moved in his face. Not quite amusement and not quite hurt. Something in between. People in town say a lot of things, he said. Are you? He was quiet for a moment. I have what I need, he said, and I can handle the debt. That was not a direct answer. And she knew it, but she was also watching a man who could have promised her gold mountains and did not. A man who said I can handle the debt rather than I have plenty, and don't worry. There was a kind of honesty and understatement that she had learned to recognize. You live alone in the mountains, she said. No family. No neighbors, no town nearby. That's right, and that suits you, it has. Until recently. He paused. A man can get used to silence and still know it isn't doing him any good. Anna looked down the river road, then back at him. Behind her was Raymond Coulter and Gerald Fitch, and a debt she could not pay in a town that had already decided her future for her. Ahead of her was a mountain she had never seen, and a man she had met 40 minutes ago who was at least telling her the truth about what he was offering. She had always believed that a woman who understood a ledger could survive almost anything. The question was which ledger she was willing to work with. I'll need to meet you again, she said, in town. In daylight. In public. Of course, he said. And I'll need to talk to someone who knows you. Someone who isn't you. That's fair, he said. Talk to Bill Harker at the feed store. He's known me 15 years, and if I decide no after all that, then you decide no, he said. I won't come back after you. She nodded once. All right. Mr. Hawthorne, Caleb, he said. She did not give him her first name back yet. She turned her horse toward home. She came back 3 days later. Bill Harker at the feed store was a round, slow-moving man of about 60, who thought carefully before saying anything. When Anna came in and said she was asking about Caleb Hawthorne, Harker stopped organizing his inventory and gave her a long, assessing look. You met Caleb? He said. I did. What did he want? That's between him and me, Anna said. What can you tell me about him? Harker scratched the back of his neck. I can tell you I've dealt with that man for going on 15 years, and he has never once said a thing he didn't mean, and never once failed to do what he said he'd do. I can tell you he pays for what he takes, full price. No argument. I can tell you he works harder than any man I've seen, he paused. I can tell you he keeps to himself, which most people take for unfriendly. It isn't. He just doesn't talk unless he has something to say. Is he a good man? Harker looked at her with something that might have been surprised respect. That's a plain question. I'm a plain woman. Yes, Harker said. He is, good as they come far as I can tell, which ain't a common thing. So I don't say it easy. Anna thanked him and left. She rode to the bank and told Aldous Pryor that she would need the payment arrangements held for a short period while she settled a personal matter. Pryor looked at her with cautious curiosity, but agreed to 10 days. She went home and she thought about it for 2 days. Not about the debt. She had already made a decision about the debt. She thought about the man, about the way he sat still on his horse, about the way he said a real marriage without looking away, about the way he said I won't come back after you, which was either cold or honest, and she had decided it was honest. On the 3rd day she sent a message to the address Harker had given her. Caleb appeared at her farm 2 mornings later. He arrived alone, with his gray horse and his worn jacket and his unhurried way of moving. He tied his horse at the post and walked to the door and knocked. And when she opened it, he looked at her face and waited. Yes, Anna, answer is yes. He nodded once. He did not break into smiles or reach for her hands or make any of the dramatic gestures she had seen from men who were performing emotion rather than feeling it. He just nodded, slowly, as if something that had been uncertain had settled. I'll go to the bank today, he said. We can talk about arrangements after. I want to be clear about something first, Anna said. All right. I am not doing this because I have no choice, she said. I have choices. I am choosing this one because I believe it gives me the best chance at a life I can respect. That means I need you to understand I am not coming into this as someone who owes you gratitude. I am coming in as an equal partner. If that isn't what you meant when you said real marriage, tell me now. He looked at her for a moment with that steady, unreadable expression that she was starting to understand was not blankness but attention. He was actually listening to her, fully. That's exactly what I meant, he said. The town reacted to the announcement the way small towns always react to things that confuse them. With noise. The women at the church auxiliary talked about it for 3 days straight. Raymond Coulter was reportedly furious, which Anna found privately satisfying. Harriet came back out to the farm and spent 40 minutes trying to convince Anna she had lost her mind. And Anna listened politely and then explained that her mind was functioning quite well. Thank you, and she would be leaving at the end of the week. The most common verdict, delivered in variations, by people who thought they were whispering and were not, was that Anna Whitmore had traded one desperate situation for a worse one. That she had chosen a poor mountain hermit over a comfortable life with Raymond Coulter, and she would be begging someone for help before winter. She heard most of it, she didn't answer any of it. She had 4 days to pack what mattered and settle what needed settling. She was systematic about it. She kept the household tools. Her father's books, her mother's quilt, 3 changes of clothes, and the small wooden box that had held the papers. She sold the furniture and the remaining household goods and used the money to pay the Reverend's donation and square the small accounts her father owed at the general store. Because she would not leave debts behind her in this town, even if the town did not deserve the courtesy. She said goodbye to the farm on the last morning, without ceremony. She stood in the empty kitchen and looked at the walls for a moment. And she thought about her father and her mother and the years that had happened inside those walls. And then she picked up her bag and walked out. Caleb came with a wagon. He was on time, which she had expected. He loaded her things without comment. He did not ask about her face or whether she was all right. He could see that she was, and he had the good sense to let that be enough. They left town before most people were awake. The road north went through the valley floor for the first several hours, cutting between farmland and then timber, and then gradually lifting into country that felt less and like anything Anna had seen before. The mountains here were not the gentle hills of the Bitterroot Valley. They were serious mountains, gray and green and vast, with the kind of scale that made a person feel appropriately small without feeling afraid. Caleb drove and said little. Anna sat beside him and watched the country and asked occasional questions. And he answered them in the same direct, undecorated way he had spoken on the river road. She asked about the land, and he told her about the timber lines and the grazing patterns. She asked about the winters, and he told her they were long and hard and required preparation, and that he was accustomed to preparing. She asked about his nearest neighbors, and he named a family 15 miles east and one 20 miles south, and said there were others further in who preferred not to be found. "And you've lived like this for how long?" she asked. 8 years, he said. Alone, yes. By choice, he was quiet for a moment. At some point it stopped being a question. She looked at him. His face was turned toward the road, which gave her the chance to look at him, the way she had not quite allowed herself to when they were face to face. He was not a handsome man in any simple or obvious sense. His face was too weathered for that, and too angular. But there was something in the set of it, in the jaw and the brow, that she found she did not want to look away from. "You're not what people think you are," she said. He glanced at her. "What do people think I am?" "They think you're poor and strange and probably a little dangerous." "And what do you think?" She considered. "I think you're deliberate," she said. "I think you choose things carefully. I think there's a reason for the way you live that you haven't told me yet." His mouth changed, slightly. Not quite a smile. "You're not what most people expect," he said. "No," Anna agreed. "I'm not." They camped the first night on a flat ledge above a creek. Caleb built the fire and cooked without fuss, and they ate in the kind of silence that was not uncomfortable, which surprised her. She had expected it to be strange. Being alone with this man in the wilderness at the beginning of a marriage. And it was strange, but not in a way that frightened her. It was strange the way any new country was strange, full of things she didn't yet know the names for. After they ate, he told her the horse's name was Soldier, and that Soldier was 14 years old, and did not like strangers touching his face, but would accept a hand at the shoulder. He said this carefully, like a man giving her informations she would actually need. And she filed it away, along with everything else she was learning. She asked him what he had done before the mountains. He was quiet for so long that she thought he had decided not to answer. "I was a lawyer," he said. "A lawyer. In Denver. For about 6 years you left to become a mountain cowboy. More or less, that's considerable change." "Yes," he said. It was. She waited to see if he would say more. He did not. She understood that there was a story there, and that she would not hear it tonight, and possibly not for a long time. And she decided that was all right. She had her own parts of herself she was not yet ready to explain to a stranger. They arrived at the property boundary the next afternoon. She knew it was his, because the fence line changed from the rough, occasional posts of open rangeland to something clean and maintained. Posts set straight and wire strung even, the kind of fencing that said the person who built it expected it to still be standing in 20 years. "This is yours," she said. "This is ours," he said. She noticed the correction. She did not say anything about it. The trail climbed for another 2 hours. Anna had stopped asking where they were going because she could see that Caleb was leading rather than explaining, and she was beginning to understand that this was how he communicated trust, not with words, but with the assumption that she would see for herself and that what she saw would be sufficient. It was, or it began to be. She could feel before she could fully explain it, that the land they were moving through was different from ordinary wilderness. There was a management to it. The creek crossings were bridged. The trail was graded. There was fencing in places where fencing had no business being unless someone had put considerable work into getting it there. Once they passed a clearing where wood had been cut and stacked with the kind of precision that came from long practice and high standards, and there was no cabin near the clearing, which meant someone had simply cut wood here and brought it somewhere else. She looked at Caleb. He was watching the trail. "There are other people here," she said. "Workers," he said. "I'll introduce you." How many workers? He thought about it. 11 regular, more in certain seasons. Anna sat with that for a while. 11 regular workers on land that everyone in the valley believed belonged to a man with nothing. She was forming a picture that did not match the one she had been given. And the picture was getting larger and more detailed the longer they traveled. "Caleb," she said. "Yes. What exactly are we riding toward?" He looked at her then, turning from the trail to meet her eyes, and in that moment she saw something move in his face that she had not seen there before. Something that looked almost like relief. Like a man who had been carrying a long weight and was approaching the place where he could finally put it down. "Home," he said. They came through the last ridge as the afternoon light hit the valley below at the angle that turned everything gold. And Anna Whitmore, who had kept her composure through the death of her father, and the weight of his debts and the humiliation of the bank and the noise of the town, and 2 days of mountain travel, felt every steady thing inside her go completely, utterly still. Because what was in that valley was not a cabin. It was not a poor man's home. It was not anything she had been told to expect. It was a mansion. Not the ornate, overcrowded kind she had seen pictures of in Eastern newspapers. The kind that showed off money like a man puffing out his chest. This was something built with a dintage entirely. Stone and timber on a scale that said pertinence, that said this will outlast everyone who ever doubted it. Wide porches running the full length of the front. Windows that caught the evening light and threw it back in long bright lines. Gardens on either side that were alive and cared for, with the kind of deep-rooted abundance that took years to grow. Barns behind, a stable outbuildings spread across the valley floor, with the organized logic of a small town that had decided to be something else. Workers stopped what they were doing when Caleb came through the gate. One of them, a man of about 40, with a steady, capable look, came forward. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said. "Good to have you back, Mr. Hawthorne. Not Caleb, the poor mountain hermit. Not the man who wore old clothes and owned a cabin and a horse. Mr. Hawthorne," said by a man whose hands told the story of serious physical work and whose voice told the story of genuine respect. Anna sat very still on the wagon seat. She had known. On the trail. She had felt the picture assembling itself, detail by detail, in a way she could not ignore. But knowing a thing is coming and arriving at it are two different experiences. And she was discovering that the distance between them was larger than she had anticipated. She turned to look at Caleb. He was already looking at her. Not with apology, not with performance, with the same steady attention he had given her every time she said something that mattered to him. As if he was watching her carefully enough that he would not miss her real reaction underneath whatever reaction she might think she was supposed to have. "You have some explaining to do," Anna said quietly. "Yes," he said, "I know." He helped her down from the wagon. He introduced her to the man. His name was Daniel. And he ran the property operation, and to 2 women who managed the household, and to 3 other workers who came forward with the cautious, respectful curiosity of people meeting someone their employer has decided to trust. Anna shook hands with each of them. She stood straight. She kept her voice even. She would not fall apart in front of people she had just met, and who would have to work alongside her for years. But inside, something was working very hard. She had married this man, believing she understood what she was walking into. She had made peace with the smallness of it, with the quiet life in the mountains, with the absence of comfort, with the distance from everything she knew. She had built her acceptance on a certain picture of her future, and every piece of that picture was currently dismantling itself in front of her eyes. Daniel showed her through the main house, while Caleb dealt with some matter in the yard. The inside was exactly what the outside promised: solid, spacious, built for real life rather than display. There were rooms she had not expected, and books she had not anticipated, and a kitchen that could feed 30 people without straining. And everywhere that careful, deliberate quality she had started to associate with Caleb Hawthorne. The sense that everything here had been chosen and placed with intention and was exactly where it was supposed to be. She went back outside. Caleb was standing near the barn, alone now, and he turned when he heard her come around the corner. He waited. Anna stopped a few feet from him. "Who are you?" she said. "Actually," he held her gaze, "the same man you met on the river road. That man told me he had what he needed and could handle the debt," she said. "He wore a jacket that had been through 10 winters. He lived, everyone told me, in a small cabin alone in the mountains." "I do have a cabin," Caleb said. "Up the East Ridge. I stay there when I'm working that side of the land. That is not the point, and you know it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No, you're right. It isn't. How much of what you told me was true?" "Everything," he said. "I didn't tell you the whole of it. But nothing I said was a lie." "Omission is its own kind of lie," Anna said. "When the omitted thing is this." She gestured at the estate around them, the mansion, the barns, the gardens, the whole hidden world he had built, behind his mountain and his old jacket and his reputation as the poorest man in the valley. "Yes," he said, "it is." He said it without qualification. Just acknowledged it as the fact it was. She looked at him. He looked back. The evening light was fading in the valley, and the air was cooling fast, the way mountain air did. And somewhere behind the barn a horse was moving in its stall, with the steady, rhythmic sound of an animal settling in for the night. "Why?" Anna said. "Help me understand why." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Not the silence of a man avoiding the question, but the silence of a man choosing the honest answer over the easy one. "There was someone," he said before, "in Denver. I thought I knew her. I thought she knew me." He stopped. "She knew what I had. She knew what my name was worth in certain circles. Those were the things she loved, and I didn't understand that until I'd already given her everything I had to give." He looked down at his hands. Then back up. After that, I came here. I had the land already inherited from my grandfather. I built this because I needed something that was mine that I had built myself. And I started being careful about who knew what it was. So everyone in the valley thinks you're poor. Everyone in the valley has no reason to come up here, he said. And I never corrected them. Until you proposed marriage to a woman you'd never spoken to, Anna said. Until I heard about Thomas Whitmore's daughter and the situation with the bank, he said. And I thought. He stopped again, and this time the silence was different. Less controlled. I thought about someone who was in a desperate position, choosing to say no to what everybody else was telling her to choose. Someone who refused Coulter. Someone who walked out of that bank and rode home alone and didn't ask anyone for help. He looked at her directly. I thought that was a woman who deserved a real option. Not a trick and not a performance. A real one. Anna stood with everything he had said. She stood with the dishonesty of the omission and the honesty of his reason for it. She stood with the anger that was moving through her, quiet and real. The anger of a woman who had made a decision based on incomplete information, and she stood with the wreckage that the decision itself had not been wrong. She had chosen him for the reasons she thought she was choosing him. Those reasons had not changed. I'm angry, she said. I know, he said. I need you to understand that. I'm not performing anger. I'm not trying to get a reaction from you. I am genuinely angry that I came into this without the full picture. I understand that, he said. And I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't be. Good, she said. Because I am. The silence settled between them. Not comfortable, but not broken either. The kind of silence that belongs to two people who have said the true things and are now figuring out what comes after. What happens now? Anna said finally. Whatever you decide, Caleb said. You know the full picture now. If you want to go back, I'll take you back. I'll honor the debt regardless. Your farm will be clear. She looked at him. You'd do that, she said. Just let me leave. I said I wouldn't come back after you if you decided no, he said. That was before you knew everything. Now you know everything. The decision is yours. She thought about the kitchen table in the empty farmhouse, and the wooden box under her father's bed, and Gerald Fitch with his leather satchel, and Raymond Coulter, and Harriet, and the 11 people at the funeral. She thought about the river road, and the way this man had sat still on his horse, and said his piece, and then waited. She thought about what she had said to him on the morning she left. I am not doing this because I have no choice. I have choices. She had a choice now too. She was standing in the middle of it. I'm not leaving, Anna said. But we need to be honest with each other from this point forward. Everything. No more omissions, no more carefully arranged truths. Agreed, Caleb said. Without hesitation. And I need to understand this place, she said. All of it. The workers and the land and the operations and whatever business you're running up here. If I'm a partner, I'm a full partner. I need to know what I'm partner to. I'll show you everything, he said. Starting tomorrow, if that suits you. Anna looked out at the valley. The last of the evening light was going out of it, and the mountains were getting dark at their edges, and the lamps in the mansion windows were beginning to glow with the warm, specific light of a place that was lived in. She had come north with a man she thought was poor. She had arrived at something she did not yet have the full vocabulary to describe. But she was standing on solid ground, her own ground. The kind made from her own choices, and she had not surrendered a single thing she was unwilling to surrender. That was enough. For tonight it was enough. Tomorrow. Then she said, and she went inside. She did not sleep well that first night. Not because the room was uncomfortable. It was the most comfortable room she had slept in since childhood. With a real mattress and heavy quilts, and a window that faced east, so the first light would come in clean and early. Not because she was afraid. She had examined fear on the ride north, and decided it was not a useful thing to carry. So she had set it down. She didn't sleep, because her mind would not stop working. She lay in the dark, and she thought about what she actually knew versus what she had been told. And she went through it the way she would go through a ledger, line by line, checking each entry against the evidence. Caleb Hawthorne was a man of significant means. He had hidden that fact deliberately and systematically for years. He had chosen to reveal it to her only after the marriage was already agreed, and he had framed that choice as protecting himself from a woman who might love his money rather than who he was. That explanation was either the most honest thing she had ever heard from a man, or it was the most sophisticated version of manipulation she had encountered. She spent the first hour deciding which one it was. By the time pale light started edging around the curtain, she had arrived at a conclusion that satisfied her, which was that it was probably both at once, and that a man could be genuinely wounded and still use that wound in ways that served him, and that neither of those things made him a bad man, just a complicated one, and she had not come north expecting simple. She got up before he did. She found the kitchen by following the smell of the wood stove that one of the household women, Clara, a sturdy, no-nonsense woman of about 50, had already lit. Clara looked up when Anna came in and gave her the assessing look that experienced household workers gave to new people who were going to be in charge, the look that was simultaneously respectful and ruthlessly evaluating. "Coffee's ready," Clara said. "Thank you," Anna said. She poured her own cup and sat at the kitchen table and looked around the room with the eyes she always used when she was trying to understand how something actually functioned rather than how it appeared to function. The kitchen was large and well supplied. The organization was practical, but not as efficient as it could be. The storage was arranged by habit rather than by logic. She could see 3 places immediately where small changes would save significant time every day. She kept those observations to herself. "How long have you worked here?" she asked Clara. "Going on 6 years," Clara said. "Since Mr. Hawthorne got the main house finished." "How many people live here full-time?" "Household. It's me and Dora, then there's Daniel and his family in the East Cottage. 5 or 6 of the ranch hands have rooms in the bunkhouse. Rest come by day." Clara paused. "It's been just Mr. Hawthorne in the main house up to now, I see," Anna said. Clara looked at her steadily. "He's a private man." "Yes," Anna said. "I've gathered that. Works hard. Doesn't ask for things he doesn't need. Doesn't bother people unnecessarily." Clara seemed to be delivering information she had decided Anna needed to have. "He's fair. Always been fair. That's been my experience as well," Anna said. Clara gave a single satisfied nod, as if something had been confirmed. Then she went back to the stove and left Anna to her coffee. Caleb came down 20 minutes later. He stopped when he saw her already at the table. Then he crossed to the stove and poured his own coffee and sat across from her. And they looked at each other in the particular way of 2 people who had said a great deal the previous evening and were now determining what the morning required. "You're up early," he said. "I'm always up early," she said. "I'd like to start the tour you mentioned. All of it. I want to understand the full operation." "After breakfast," he said. Of course. It was not awkward, exactly. It was something closer to the early days of a business partnership, where the terms had been agreed, but the working relationship hadn't yet found its rhythm. She could feel him watching her, not in an intrusive way, but in the way of a man who was paying attention. She didn't mind being paid attention to. She minded being watched like something fragile, and he wasn't doing that. He showed her the land that morning, starting with the immediate property and working outward. She had understood from the valley view the previous evening that the estate was large. She had not understood how large until she was moving through it on horseback with Caleb, beside her naming what each section was and how it operated. The ranch ran cattle, a real operation, not a hobby, with a herd that would have made the largest ranchers in the Bitterroot Valley straighten up and pay attention. There was a timber lease on the northern section, managed carefully, cut selectively, replanted deliberately. There was a mine silver, not played out, producing steadily under a small crew that Caleb trusted and paid well above the going rate. There were also, scattered through the valley, a dozen families who had built small homesteads on Hawthorne land, with Caleb's explicit permission and at below-market rents that he had not raised in 6 years. "Why?" Anna asked when he showed her the rent ledger back at the office. "A spare clean room off the main hallway, that was organized with the same precision as everything else he owned. Why what? Why do you let families live here at rents you could triple without anyone objecting? You own the land. They need the land. That's a straightforward negotiation in your favor. Caleb looked at her. Some of them came up here because they had nowhere else to go. Had the same problem yours did, with banks and debts and men like Coulter buying up land for cents on the dollar. He paused. I know what it is to need something and have someone who has it choose not to help. I don't want to be that. Anna absorbed that. She said it next to everything else she was assembling about this man. She spent the rest of the morning with Daniel, going through the actual operation numbers, the cattle count, the timber contracts, the mine output, the household expenses, the wages. Daniel was precise and organized and clearly intelligent, and he answered every question she asked without condescension, which she noticed and appreciated. By noon, she had a picture that was both more impressive and more complicated than the evening view of the estate had suggested. Caleb Hawthorne was not simply wealthy. He was running a genuine enterprise, with moving parts that required constant coordination and real expertise. And some parts of it, she could already see, were being managed with skill, but without the kind of systematic oversight that would keep them growing, instead of just stable. She came back to the main house for the midday meal with a list of questions forming in her mind that had nothing to do with emotions or marriage and everything to do with how a ledger worked. Caleb was already at the table. He looked at her face when she came in, and something in his expression shifted. Just slightly, like a man who had been expecting one kind of news and was receiving a different kind. You have thoughts, he said. Several, she said. She sat down. Your timber contract with Langley is underpriced for current market rates. You could renegotiate for 30% more without losing the account they need your volume more than you need their specific business. Your cattle purchase cycle is buying late in the season consistently, which is costing you on price. And the household provisioning is being done by feel rather than by any kind of planned inventory, which means you're both over-ordering some things and running short on others. Caleb sat very still. Those are the obvious ones, Anna said. I'd need to look more carefully at the mine output records to say anything useful there. You figured all that out this morning, he said. My father taught me the books when I was 12, she said. I've been reading numbers since before most people in this county thought women needed to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the timber contract was my father-in-law's arrangement. I kept it because changing it felt like he stopped. Anna waited. It felt like admitting the relationship had been a mistake, he said. Which it was. But admitting things takes time. She looked at him steadily. I'm not going to push on that, she said. But I will tell you that keeping a bad contract, because changing it is emotionally complicated, is the kind of thinking that loses money and doesn't actually resolve anything. I know that, he said. Good. Then you won't mind if I draft a renegotiation letter this week. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression that was impossible to read cleanly. Then he said, no, I won't mind. That was the beginning. The days that followed had a shape that neither of them had entirely planned, and both of them were navigating as it happened. Caleb was out in the mornings, early, working the land and the cattle operation, with the hands in a way that Anna quickly understood was not supervisory performance but genuine labor. He worked alongside his men, in the dirt on horseback, doing the actual physical work of a ranch. He came in at midday dark with dust and smelling of horse and cattle, and if he noticed that Anna had been reorganizing the provisioning system or spending 3 hours with Daniel going through the mine records, he did not comment on it. He watched her, though. She caught it regularly. Not a stare, just attention, the way a man notices a person who is doing something that surprises him, and keeps noticing because the surprise has not worn off. Clara noticed it too. One afternoon in the second week, when Anna was working at the kitchen table on the timber contract draft and Caleb had just come through to get coffee before going back out, Clara waited until he was gone and then said, without looking up from the bread she was forming, he hasn't sat at this table for his midday meal since before I came here. Anna looked up. He does now, yes, Clara said. She pressed the bread down firmly. He does now. The workers were the next thing. She had been observing them the same way she had observed the ledgers and the kitchen and the contract, with the eye of someone who was not judging, but was understanding. They were good workers, loyal, in the specific way that people became loyal to someone who treated them fairly in a world that mostly didn't. But there was a tension in some of them that she couldn't quite place. A carefulness that went slightly beyond the normal caution of employees meeting a new person in charge. She found out why on a Thursday afternoon in the third week. She was crossing from the main house to the supply barn when she heard two of the hands talking on the other side of the barn wall. She was not trying to listen. She stopped, because she heard her own name. Hawthorne's new wife. You think she's going to stay? Don't know why she would. She's clearly not what he told her to expect. She doesn't seem like she's going anywhere. Yet. But you wait. Women don't come up here expecting all of this and just settle in. Not when they thought they were marrying a man who had nothing. This one's different. A pause. You think he told her about what happened with Don't Know? He doesn't talk about that. Never has. Well, if she finds out on her own, that's going to be a problem. Anna stood on her side of the barn wall and waited until they moved away. Then she stood for another moment, completely still, thinking about what she had just heard. There was something she hadn't been told. That was not a surprise exactly. She had known from the first evening that Caleb had given her an edited version of his history. The woman in Denver, the betrayal, the long retreat into the mountains. That was a story with gaps in it, the size of a man's whole life. But the hands' conversation had a specific gravity to it. This was not the gap of a man who was private about his emotions. This was something that had a weight other people could feel. She decided not to confront Caleb about it directly. Not yet. She would wait and watch, the way she always did, and she would understand the shape of it before she stepped into it. What she did not anticipate was how quickly the shape would come to her. It came in the form of a visitor. 23 days after Anna's arrival, a man appeared at the gate of the Hawthorne estate on a fine bay horse with the kind of clothes that said city rather than mountain and the kind of expression that said he had arrived somewhere he considered entitled to be. His name was Preston Vance. He was perhaps 40, broad-shouldered, with the particular confidence of a man who had won enough arguments to stop worrying about losing them. Daniel came to find Anna because Caleb was out on the north pasture and the visitor was asking for him by name. Anna went to the front entrance herself. Vance looked at her with the brief, assessing look of a man who had not expected a woman and was immediately trying to determine her relevance. "I'm here to see Caleb Hawthorne," he said. "He's working," Anna said. "I'm his wife. What's your business?" Something moved in Vance's face. He recovered it quickly. "His wife," he repeated. "I wasn't aware Caleb had married." "He has," Anna said. "Your name?" "Preston Vance. I have legal business with him." "What kind?" He smiled in the way of a man who was used to not having to answer that question from someone he didn't consider his equal. "The kind I'll discuss with him directly." "Then you're welcome to wait," Anna said. "Or come back. Either one." She held the door open, not inviting him in, making it clear, without saying so, that the threshold was hers to control. Vance chose to wait outside. Anna sent a rider for Caleb. He came back faster than she expected, which told her something about the message the rider had delivered. He came through the gate on soldier with that unhurried physical steadiness that was simply how he moved. But his face when he saw Vance had changed. The careful neutrality he usually wore was replaced by something colder and more deliberate, like a man putting on armor. "Preston," he said, pulling up. "Caleb." Vance looked up at him. "You've been difficult to reach." "I've been home," Caleb said. "Which you know requires effort to get to. Can we speak privately?" "My wife stays," Caleb said. Without looking at Anna, not dramatically, just as a fact. Stated plainly in the same register he used for all facts. Vance's smile stayed in place. "The matter involves the Helena property agreement. I think you'll want whatever you think I'll want." "Say it," Caleb said. I'm not in the habit of having private conversations about business my wife is partner to. A pause. Vance looked at Anna briefly, then back at Caleb. The agreement your father signed before his death is being called into question. There are parties who believe the terms were not fulfilled on the Hawthorne side and are seeking remedy. Caleb was very still. That agreement was fulfilled to the letter. My father died 3 months after it was signed, and I honored every term of it, personally. There is documentation suggesting otherwise, Vance said smoothly. I'm here as a courtesy, giving you the chance to review the position before it becomes a formal proceeding. What documentation? Anna asked. Both men looked at her. Vance with the particular irritation of a man who has been interrupted by someone he discounted. Caleb with something that was not quite surprise, more like recognition. The look of a man watching something happen that he had hoped would not. I'm sorry, Vance said. What documentation? Anna said again. You said there is documentation suggesting the agreement terms weren't fulfilled. I'd like to know what documentation that is, who holds it, and in what proceeding you're representing the opposing party. Vance studied her for a moment. Then he said, with a fraction more respect than he had started with, the documentation is a modified contract copy held by the Colburn Land Trust in Helena. The proceeding would be before the territorial court. And you're here as counsel for the Colburn Trust? Anna said. As a representative. That's not the same as counsel, she said. Are you an attorney? Something tightened in Vance's expression. I represent their interests. Then I'd suggest, Anna said carefully, that when you go back to Helena, you tell the Colburn Land Trust that the Hawthorne estate will require full written documentation of their claim, including the chain of custody for any modified contract copy, before there is any further conversation on this matter, and that they should expect to substantiate every element of their position in writing before a response is offered. Vance looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb was watching Anna with an expression she had not seen on his face before. She would not have been able to name it precisely. It was not pride, exactly. It was something closer to the look of a man who has been carrying a room by himself for a long time, and has just discovered that someone else is standing at the other wall. You'll hear from the trust, Vance said. He mounted his horse and left. When he was through the gate, the sound of hooves fading down the mountain trail, Anna turned to find Caleb still looking at her. Tell me about the Helena property agreement, she said. He was quiet for a moment. It's a long story, I have time. They went inside. Clara disappeared tactfully. They sat at the kitchen table, not the formal sitting room. Not the office, the kitchen, which was where the real conversations in this house happened, and Caleb told her. His father had been a builder as well as a rancher. In the decade before his death, he had acquired several properties in Helena commercial lots, in a section of the city that was beginning to grow. He had entered into an agreement with a development trust, the Colburn family's operation, to develop those lots jointly. The agreement had clear terms. When his father died, Caleb had gone to Helena and reviewed every piece of it and had fulfilled each requirement exactly as written. He had thought the matter was settled, but it wasn't, Anna said. Apparently not. This Colburn who is behind it. Caleb set his jaw. Originally it was old Gerald Colburn. He died 2 years ago. His son took it over. His son is a different kind of man. What kind? The kind who looks at a fulfilled agreement and tries to find a seam in it. Anna thought about the way Vance had presented the claim. The modified contract copy. The careful framing of it as a courtesy when it was clearly a threat. She had seen this shape before, in the papers her father had left behind, in the conversations she had overheard at the bank. It was the shape of a man using paperwork, the way other men used a weapon, not necessarily because the underlying claim was real, but because the process of defending against it cost more than many people could afford. The question was whether Caleb could afford it. The answer, she already knew, was yes. But the question underneath that was whether the Colburn Trust knew the full extent of what they were going after, or whether they believed they were pressing on a man who lived in the mountains and wore old clothes and was known to everyone in the valley as the poorest man in the county. She thought they did not know. She thought they were pressing on a reputation that Caleb had built as a shield. And the irony of it was that the shield had become a vulnerability. "They think you're easier to go after than you are," she said. Caleb looked at her. "That's been the general understanding. You've let that understanding stand." "Yes." "It's going to stop working." "Yes," he said. He said it heavily, like a man who had known a certain season was ending and was watching it end. "I know." She looked at him across the kitchen table. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle, and in it she could see the lines of his face more clearly than she usually did the years in it. The weather, the things he had decided, and the things that had been decided for him. "I need to know everything," she said. "All of it. Not the version you decided was enough. Every agreement, every property, every arrangement your father made, and every one you've made since. I need to see the full picture." "That's a significant amount of material," he said. "I'm aware," she said. "I'm also the person who found 3 problems with your operation before noon on my second day here. I need you to trust me with the rest of it." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Why?" he said. Not challenged. Genuine. "What do you get from it?" She thought about the river road and the question of what kind of ledger she was willing to work with. She thought about standing in the valley the previous evening and choosing to go inside rather than leave. "I told you I came in as a partner," she said. "That's what partners do. They don't stay out of the difficult parts." He looked down at the table. Then he looked back up. "All right," he said. They worked until well past supper that night. He brought out the documents, boxes of them, from the office. Things that had been organized but not reviewed as a whole. The accumulated paper of 2 generations of Hawthorne business decisions. Anna went through them with the systematic concentration she brought to every ledger, making notes, asking questions, building the full map of what existed and what was owed and what had been agreed to and by whom. What she found, as the candle burned low on the kitchen table, was that the Helena property situation was not the only thing someone might try to press on. There were 2 other agreements from his father's era that had ambiguous language. There was a boundary dispute with a neighbor to the north that had never been formally resolved. There was a loan from a Helena bank that carried terms Caleb had accepted at face value, without having them reviewed by anyone with legal training. She set down her pen and looked at him. He was watching her. He had been watching her for the past 2 hours, not reading anything, just watching her work. She had been aware of it without being bothered by it. There was something in his attention that was different from surveillance. It was more like witnessing. "You need a lawyer," she said. "A real one. Not Vance, not anyone connected to the Colburn interests. Someone who is yours. I know a man in Helena," he said. "Marcus Reed, he knew my father. Contact him this week," she said. "Before Vance has time to get back to Helena and start building their case." "You think it's that urgent?" "I think a man who shows up with a modified contract copy and calls it a courtesy is moving on a timeline," she said. "I think we need to be moving on one too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We." She looked at him. "I said what I said." His face did something then that she had not seen it do before in any of the weeks she had been watching it. Something in it opened. Just slightly. Just enough. The way a door opens an inch, and you can see the light on the other side of it. "I've been doing this alone for 8 years, he said. "I know," she said. "You mentioned it. I'm not good at." He stopped. "I don't have a lot of practice at asking for help." "I'm not waiting to be asked," Anna said. "I'm telling you, those are different things." She gathered the papers into their proper stacks and stood up from the table and looked at him across the kitchen. "Send for Marcus Reed in the morning. And get some sleep. Because tomorrow I want to look at that north boundary question and I'll need you to explain the geography." She went upstairs before he could respond. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and listened to the mountain quiet, which was not actually quiet but was full of wind and the distant sound of the creek and the occasional shift of horses in the stable. She was not the same woman who had sat at a farmhouse kitchen table 3 weeks ago, counting $47 in a tin and trying to find a way to survive. She was not sure she was the same woman who had come through that mountain gate and seen the mansion and felt everything in her go still. She was becoming something else, and she could feel it the way you feel the ground change under your feet when the terrain shifts, not always pleasant, not always certain but undeniable. What she was becoming, she thought, was a woman who lived here. A woman who had walked into a hidden world and instead of being overwhelmed by it, had started to understand it. Had started quietly and systematically to make it better. She had not expected to find a man who would let her do that. Who would sit across a kitchen table and hand her boxes of documents and watch her work with an expression that said he was not afraid of what she might find. Who would say we and mean it. She was still angry about the omission. She expected she would be for a while yet. That was honest. But underneath the anger was something else now, something that had not been there on the river road or even in the valley on that first evening. Something that was quieter and more durable and considerably more complicated. She wasn't ready to name it, but she knew it was there. Downstairs she heard the sound of Caleb moving through the house, checking the doors and the fire the way he did every night before he went up. She had learned his sounds in 3 weeks, the particular way he closed the office door, the deliberate step on the third stair. A man who had been alone for 8 years moved through his own house with the specific, known rhythm of someone who had memorized the silences. She was changing those silences. She could hear it in the way they had shifted since she came. And she thought, lying there in the mountain dark, that Caleb Hawthorne could hear it too. Marcus Reed arrived 4 days after Caleb sent the message. He came on a roan horse with a saddlebag full of papers and the no-nonsense bearing of a man who had practiced law in Montana for 30 years and had stopped being surprised by anything people did to each other over land and money. He was past 60, lean and sharp-eyed, with a white mustache and the habit of listening to everything completely before saying a word in response. Anna liked him immediately. She recognized the type, not the type that performed competence, but the type that simply had it, quietly, and without advertisement. The kind of man her father would have trusted, which in her experience was a reliable indicator. Reed sat at the kitchen table with the documents Anna had organized into clean stacks over the preceding 3 days. And he went through them, the way she had systematically, methodically, asking specific questions rather than general ones. He directed roughly half of his questions to Caleb and half to Anna, which told her that he had assessed the situation accurately within the first 10 minutes of being in the room. After 2 hours he set down the last paper and folded his hands on the table. The Colburn claim is thin, he said. The modified contract copy they're holding, if it's what Vance described, is almost certainly a fabrication. The original was filed with the territorial clerk in Helena in 1871, and the chain of completion on the Hawthorne side is documented. They know that, which means they're not actually planning to win in court. Then what are they planning? Caleb said. Cost, Reed said. They're planning on the process costing you more than the underlying property is worth. They're betting that you'll settle rather than fight, because fighting takes money and time and legal expertise that most people up here don't have easy access to. He paused. They've done it before. 3 other families in the past 2 years. 2 of them settled. 1 of them lost the property entirely because they couldn't sustain the defense. Anna had already suspected this. Hearing it confirmed was something different from suspecting it, something colder and more specific. Who did they go after before? She asked. Reed named 3 families. Anna did not know them, but she watched Caleb's face when he heard the names, and she could see that he did. The muscle in his jaw tightened in the particular way it tightened when something made him angry, not explosive anger, but the slower, more dangerous kind that built quietly and held. The Lindquist family, Caleb said. They were on a land grant north of Helena. 3 children. They lost the property 18 months ago, Reed said simply. Caleb was silent for a moment. What do we do? Anna said. Reed looked at her. You go on offense. You don't wait for them to bring a formal proceeding. You petition the territorial court first, requesting judicial confirmation of the original agreement's fulfillment, and a ruling on the validity of any modified copy. You get your filing in front of a judge before they do, which means the narrative starts from your position rather than theirs. How long does that take? Caleb asked. Filing 2 weeks. A hearing 6 to 8 weeks after that, Reed paused. And in the meantime, you'd benefit from documentation of the Colburn Trust's pattern. The other families. If we can show this is a systematic strategy rather than a legitimate grievance, it changes the character of the proceeding considerably. I can do that, Anna said. Both men looked at her. The other families, she said. Their situations, their original agreements, if they have documents. The pattern of how the trust approached each of them. If there's a consistent method, it will be visible in the paperwork. She looked at Reed directly. I assume you know how to reach these families. I know how to reach 2 of them, Reed said carefully. Then I'd like to write to them this week, Anna said. With your guidance on what to ask for. Reed studied her for a moment with the assessing look of a lawyer who was revising his estimate of a situation. Then he nodded slowly. That could be valuable, he said. Done carefully. I'm always careful, Anna said. Caleb was looking at her again. She could feel it without looking up from the documents she had already pulled back toward her. He had a particular quality of attention that she had come to recognize as distinct from ordinary observations, more focused, more personal, the look of a man who was watching not just what you were doing, but what it meant about who you were. She did not look up because she was not ready to have that conversation yet. Reed stayed 2 days. In that time, he and Anna and Caleb built the framework of their legal response with the kind of focused collaboration that Anna had always found clarifying the problem had a shape now, a defined perimeter, and defined problems were solvable problems. She had believed that since she was 12 years old, and it had never failed her yet. What she was less prepared for was what happened after Reed rode back toward Helena with the filing paperwork. The morning after he left, Caleb came to find her in the office, where she was drafting the letters to the Lindquist family and the other former Colburn target Reed had identified. She heard him come in and registered his presence without looking up immediately, which by now was simply how they moved around each other, with the awareness of people who shared a space and had begun to learn its rhythms together. I want to tell you something, he said. She looked up then. His voice had a quality she had not heard in it before. Not the deliberate, measured tone he used for most conversations. Something underneath that, less managed. All right, she said. He sat down across from her. He was not wearing his work jacket. He had come in from the yard, and he had the dust of it on him and his hat in his hands, which was the posture of a man who was approaching something that made him uncertain rather than standing square in front of it. The woman in Denver, he said. I gave you the outline of it. I want to give you the rest. Anna set down her pen. Her name was Catherine Colburn, he said. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Anna heard it and did not move and let the ripples of it spread until she understood what she was looking at. Colburn. The Colburn Land Trust, she said. Her father's, Caleb said. Gerald Colburn. She was his only daughter. The room was very quiet. We were engaged, Caleb said, for 11 months. I was in Denver practicing law. Her father and my father had done business together. That's the agreement in the Helena documents. The original arrangement. It was meant to be a business alliance and a family one at the same time. He paused. I believed she loved me. I had ample evidence that I was wrong. But I chose not to see it for longer than I should have. What happened? Anna said. I came home early one evening, he said. She was meeting with a man from another Denver firm, a competitor of my practice. What I heard, before they knew I was there, was a conversation about what my caseload was worth and how quickly her father's business could absorb it after our marriage. He stopped. She wasn't marrying me. She was acquiring my client list and my professional connections for her father's interests. Anna did not say anything. She was watching his face and listening to what was underneath the words, not the story itself, which she had partly anticipated, but the cost of telling it. The specific way a person's voice flattened when they were discussing something that had once been an open wound and was now scar tissue. Present always. Painless most of the time. Impossible to fully forget. I left Denver 6 months later, Caleb said. I came here. I built what you see. He looked down at his hands. Her father died 2 years ago and left the trust to her brother, who apparently has inherited her approach to acquiring what belongs to other people. The modified contract, Anna said slowly. The claim against your property. It's not about the Helena lots. No, Caleb said. The Helena lots aren't worth what it would cost them to pursue this. It's about the mining lease. The north section. The Colburn Trust has been trying to get access at Mountain for 5 years through every route they could find, and they think they've found one now, Anna said. They think they have a pressure point, Caleb said. Or they did. Before. He paused. Before you asked Vance what documentation he was holding and made him understand the position was not what he expected. She looked at him steadily. You should have told me this from the beginning. Yes, he said. Without argument. The whole connection. When Vance showed up. You watched me question him and you knew the full context and you didn't say anything. I know, he said. Why, he was quiet for a moment. I was afraid, he said, that if you knew where it came from, what it was connected to, you'd conclude the marriage was more complicated than you'd signed on for. That you'd weigh it and decide the ledger didn't balance. Anna took a breath. She held it for a moment and then let it out slowly. Caleb, she said, I renegotiated a timber contract in my second week here. I reorganized the household provisioning. I spent 3 days preparing legal documents with your attorney. At what point did I give you the impression I was going to walk away from complicated? He looked at her. Something in his face shifted in that way. It did that specific, barely visible opening. You didn't know, she said. I didn't. So I need you to stop making decisions about what I can handle. Because every time you do that, you're doing the same thing every other person in my life has done, deciding my limits for me. And I came north specifically to get away from that. The silence between them had a different weight now. Not the comfortable working silence of the past weeks. Something more fragile and more honest. You're right, he said. I'm sorry, she nodded once. She picked up her pen. Now, tell me everything about the mining lease. Every detail. Because if the Colburn Trust has been circling it for 5 years, there's a reason, and I want to know exactly what we're protecting, he told her. The mine was not simply a productive silver operation. It sat on a geological formation that Caleb's grandfather had first identified, and that Caleb had spent 4 years having quietly surveyed. The silver was the visible asset. What was beneath it, what the surveys suggested with strong probability, was a copper deposit of considerable size. In 1876, with the country's rail expansion consuming copper at a rate that outpaced existing supply, a confirmed copper deposit in the Montana mountains was not merely valuable. It was potentially transformative. He had told no one. Not Reed, not Daniel, not the surveyors who each had only a piece of the picture. But someone told the Colburns, Anna said. Caleb's jaw set. That's what I believe. Yes. Who knew enough to tell them? That's what I don't know. She set down her pen again and thought. Someone with access to enough of the survey information to understand what it meant. Someone who had either seen the documents or been told about them by someone who had. Who have you discussed the surveys with, she said. Anyone in any context, he thought carefully. He named 3 names. 2 survey contractors, both working in separate areas. And one other person, a man named Hargrove, who had done assay work in the mine itself, and who Caleb trusted with more of the picture than anyone else. Where is Hargrove now? Anna asked. He left my employ 8 months ago, Caleb said. Said he had an opportunity in Butte, and the Colburn Trust began making moves against the property. About 7 months ago, Caleb said. He was very still. I hadn't connected those 2 things. They connect, Anna said. She could see in his face the specific discomfort of a man who prided himself on clear-sightedness and had just been shown a blind spot. Not humiliation. Something more honest than that. The particular pain of realizing that something you thought you had protected was already compromised. All right, she said. Here's what we need to do. She spent the next hour laying it out. And he listened the way he always listened to her when she was working completely. Without interruption, without the impulse, some men had to offer alternatives before they had heard the full argument. She told him they needed Reed to expand the scope of the court petition to include a preemptive protection on the mining lease specifically, establishing its legal boundary before the Colburn Trust could bring a parallel claim. She told him they needed to determine what Hargrove had access to and when he had accessed it, which would require careful inquiry through channels that couldn't be traced back to Caleb directly. And she told him they needed to stop operating as if the Colburn pressure was just a legal problem. It's also a reputational problem, she said. They've been using your anonymity against you. Every business dealing you have, every arrangement, every agreement, they're all made with a man the world believes is a poor mountain rancher with nothing worth protecting. The moment they expose the full picture of what's here, you lose every advantage the obscurity gave you. You think they'll expose it, he said. I think they'll threaten to, she said. And I think they'll use the threat as leverage. Sign the mining lease over to the trust, or we tell every business partner you have that the man they thought they knew is not who he said he was. She paused. And in a world that doesn't trust people who aren't transparent about what they have, that threat has teeth. Caleb was very still. So what do you suggest, he said. We tell the truth first, Anna said. Selectively. Carefully. To the people whose relationships matter to your business and whose understanding you need before someone else gets to them with a version of the story that serves the Colburn interests. She looked at him directly. You let me help you do that. That means exposing everything, he said. The land, the mine, all of it. To the right people. At the right time in the right way, she said. Yes. It means being the one who controls the story instead of having it taken from you. He sat with that for a long moment. She could see him working through it, not resistance, but genuine consideration, the way he did when something mattered enough to think about honestly, rather than quickly. I've spent 8 years building this, so that no one knew what it was, he said. So that no one could come after it. And someone came after it anyway, Anna said. Not unkindly. The wall didn't hold. The question is what you build next. He looked at her across the desk with an expression that was more open than she had seen it. The armor that was usually present, in some form the careful management. The deliberate composure was thinner now. She could see the man on the other side of it more clearly. The man who had come to the river road and asked a stranger to trust him and then discovered that trust required more than he had been willing to give. I'm not good at this, he said. At what? At letting people in, he paused. At believing it won't go the way it went before. I know, she said. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it rather than file it away for later. All right, he said. I am not Catherine Colburn, Anna said. I am not here for what you own. I was not here for what you owned when I thought you owned a cabin and a horse. And I am not here for it now. What I am here for, what I am actually working on. Right now, at this desk, is making sure that what you built stays yours. Not because it benefits me, because it's right, because you built it honestly, and no one has the right to take it from you. She held his gaze. That's who I am, and I need you to start trusting that. Because this fight is going to get harder before it gets easier, and I cannot do my part of it if you're still deciding how much of the truth to give me. The silence lasted long enough that she started to wonder if she had said too much. Not the content, she stood by every word of it, but the directness of it. The laying down of terms in a moment that was already charged. Then Caleb said, the copper surveys are in the locked drawer on the left side of the desk. The key is on my watch chain. She looked at him. He reached into his vest pocket and laid the key on the desk between them. She picked it up. She opened the drawer. She took out the survey documents and began to read. He watched her read, and he did not leave the room. What she found in those documents was both more and less than she had feared. The surveys were thorough and professionally done. The copper deposit was real. The probability assessments were cautious. As good surveying always was, but the underlying geology was compelling. Not confirmed until you sank a proper test shaft, but compelling enough that any experienced mining man would understand immediately what it meant. She could also see, now that she knew to look for it, the places where Hargrove's access to the full picture would have been visible. He had signed off on 3 of the deeper assay reports. He had enough to understand what was there, though not the full scope of it. "We need to know who Hargrove spoke to," she said, "before Reed files anything, because if there's documentation of a conversation with Colburn interests, that changes how we present our case." "How do we find that out without alerting them?" Caleb said. "Do you know anyone in Butte who isn't connected to the mining industry's main social circles?" she said. "Someone who could ask questions without those questions coming back to your name." He thought for a moment. "There's a woman, Martha Greer. She runs a boarding house there. She hears everything that moves through that town, and she is not connected to any of the industry networks because she has no patience for them." "Write to her," Anna said. "Tell her you're looking for information about a former employee. Don't mention the Colburn name. Just ask if Hargrove has been seen and who he's been seen with." Caleb nodded slowly. "You're running a counterintelligence operation." "I'm gathering information," Anna said. "Which is what you do before you decide what to do with it." He looked at her with something she could not quite name, something that was neither the careful assessment he usually directed at her, nor the newer, more open thing she had started seeing in the past few weeks. "Something that was quieter and more personal, Anna," he said. She looked up. "Thank you," he said, "just that. Not elaborated. Not performed." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at the surveys and said, "Write to Martha Greer today. And tomorrow I want to look at the north boundary documentation. If there's a dispute there that's never been formally resolved, the Colburn interest could try to use it as a second front." "They could," he said. "I'll get the papers." He left to find them, and she stayed at the desk and continued reading the surveys. But something in the room had shifted in a way she could feel without being able to fully articulate. Not the legal situation, not the strategy. Something between the 2 people in it. She had laid herself out plainly. "I am not Catherine Colburn. I am not here for what you own." She had meant every word, and she knew that he knew she had meant it. And the knowing of it sat between them now, like something real and solid, where before there had only been the transactional shape of a marriage of necessity. She was not ready to call it what it was beginning to look like. But she recognized it the way she recognized good land, or a sound argument, by the specific way it held together, the way the pieces fit without forcing. The letter from Martha Greer came back 12 days later. Anna was in the office when Daniel brought it in. She read it once, then again more slowly, then she set it on the desk and went to find Caleb. He was in the stable. She came through the door, and he turned from the horse he was checking, and saw her face, and was already alert before she said a word. "Hargrove met with a man named Silas Vane Butte," she said. "Twice, in the month before he left your employ. Martha Greer says Vane is known as an agent for Eastern land interests. She's seen him meet with Colburn men before." Caleb said nothing. "He didn't leave for an opportunity in Butte," Anna said. "He was recruited. He gave them the survey information and then resigned before you could connect the 2 things." Caleb was very still. "There's more," she said. "Martha heard, and she says this is 3 degrees of removed. So take it accordingly that the Colburn position is that they expect this to be resolved by the end of summer. That they have a filing ready and they're waiting for something before they bring it. Waiting for what? She doesn't know. But a filing they're holding back means they think they have something they haven't used yet." Anna looked at him. "Something that comes after the courtesy visit from Vance. Something they believe will change our position." Caleb looked at her steadily. "What could change our position at this point?" Anna thought about everything she had learned in the past weeks. The documents, the history, the woman in Denver, the business connections, and the families on the land and the mine and the surveys. And then a possibility came to her that was cold and specific. "They're going to claim the marriage is invalid," she said. The words landed in the stable with a particular weight. Caleb stared at her. "On what grounds?" "That it was contracted under false pretenses," she said. Your false pretenses. If they can establish that you concealed material information about your identity and assets when contracting the marriage, they can argue the marriage is legally void. And if the marriage is void, then my presence here as your partner in this legal action has no standing. She paused. And more importantly, a man who concealed his identity and assets in a marriage contract has damaged credibility before a territorial court. The silence in the stable was absolute. They'd destroy your reputation, Caleb said, in open court. To get to the mine. Yes, Anna said. And they'd use our marriage as the instrument. She watched him absorb this. She watched him understand what it meant not just legally, but personally. That the thing he had kept hidden for 8 years, the wound that had sent him to the mountains, was about to be used against him in precisely the way he had most feared. That a woman who was supposed to be the second chance was about to become, in the hands of the Colburn Trust, another weapon. She could see the weight of it in the set of his shoulders. Not collapse. He was not a man who collapsed, but something close to the edge of it. Caleb, she said. He looked at her. They can only use it if it's true, she said. And it isn't. You did not deceive me in our marriage contract. You omitted. Those are different things. And more importantly, I know the full picture now. I have known it for weeks. I have been working with it and within it as a full partner. The claim of deception fails against a wife who is standing in her husband's corner in open court with complete knowledge of his affairs and a signed statement that she was never deceived about what mattered. He looked at her for a long moment. But you'd do that, he said. Stand in open court. I would do considerably more than that, Anna said. But yes, I'd start there. Something crossed his face that she had been watching for and had not expected to see this quickly. Something that broke through the last of the careful management he kept between himself and the world. That landed in his eyes and in the line of his mouth and in the way he was looking at her, not with assessment. Not with gratitude. Not with the restrained appreciation of a man who had found a capable partner. With something that had no manageable name. She held his gaze. She did not look away from what she saw there. We should send Reed an amended brief, she said. Her voice was steady. Today, if possible. I want him to have the Hargrove connection, and I want him to anticipate the marriage validity argument before the Colburn side brings it. Yes, Caleb said. His voice was quieter than usual. And we need to talk about who else needs to know the full picture of your situation. The right people, like we discussed. She paused. Starting with Daniel. He'll want to know why I kept it from him, Caleb said. Then you'll tell him why, Anna said. And he'll probably say he already suspected most of it and is just glad you're telling him now. Caleb almost smiled. It was enough. She turned to go back to the house and draft the letter to Reed. She had gone 3 steps when his voice came from behind her. Anna. She stopped. When you said you'd stand in court, he said. Did you mean it? She turned back. She looked at him across the stable in the afternoon light. This man she had met on a river road less than 2 months ago and had married for entirely practical reasons and had somehow arrived here with, at this point on the map of something she had not planned and could not fully name. Every word I say to you, she said, I mean. She went back to the house. She sat down at the desk and picked up her pen and began the letter to Reed. And she wrote steadily and without stopping because the work was clear and the situation was defined, and defined situations were solvable ones. But her hand was not entirely steady, and she did not examine too closely why that was. Reed's response came back in 6 days, which was faster than Anna had expected, and told her that the attorney understood the urgency in a way that did not require explanation. He confirmed her analysis of the marriage validity threat. He had, in fact, already heard a rumor through his Helena contacts that the Colburn Trust's legal representative, a man named Aldrich, not Vance, someone with actual courtroom standing, had been making inquiries about the circumstances of the Hawthorne marriage. How it had been arranged. What representations had been made. Whether there were witnesses to the original agreement on the river road who could speak to what Caleb had disclosed and what he had not. They're already building it, Anna said. She was at the kitchen table with the letter in her hand and Caleb across from her, and Daniel standing near the door. Because she had asked Daniel to be present, she had decided that Caleb's conversation with his most trusted man could not wait any longer. And Caleb had agreed. Daniel had stood in the doorway and listened to the full account of the situation, the mine surveys, the Hargrove connection, the Colburn history, all of it with the stillness of a man who was receiving large information and organizing it as it came. When Caleb finished, Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knew something was underneath it. The trust showing up here, the way Vance looked at the property when he was waiting." He paused. "I didn't know the shape of it." "You're not angry," Caleb said. It was not quite a question. "I'm not angry," Daniel said. "I've worked for you long enough to know you don't do things without a reason. Whether I think the reason was good enough is a different conversation, and we can have it later." He looked at Anna. "What do you need from me right now?" She appreciated that. She appreciated it enormously. "I need you to quietly account for every worker on this property who had any contact with Hargrove during his last 3 months here," she said. Not accusatory, just a clear picture of who knew what he was doing, who he talked to, whether anything seemed off to anyone at the time. "People notice things they don't always report." Daniel nodded. "I'll have something for you by tomorrow." He left. And Anna turned back to Reed's letter and the specific problem of the marriage validity claim. The challenge was structural. The Colburn Trust's argument would rest on the premise that Caleb had concealed material facts, his wealth, his property, his true identity when entering into the marriage agreement. In territorial law, a marriage contract entered under significant deception could be challenged. The challenge would not necessarily succeed, but in front of the wrong judge. With the right presentation, it could create enough uncertainty to damage Caleb's credibility as a party to the property dispute. What they needed was a clear, documented record of what Anna had known, and when she had known it, and her unambiguous statement that she considered herself fully informed and fully consenting to the marriage as it stood. Reed had drafted an affidavit for her to sign. It was careful legal language, precise and clean, and it said essentially what she had told Caleb in the stable, that she was aware of the full scope of her husband's assets and affairs, that she had conducted her own review of the property operations, that she had never been deceived about anything material to her consent, and that she stood as a willing partner in the marriage and in any legal proceedings related to the defense of the Hawthorne estate. She read it twice, then she signed it without hesitation. Caleb watched her sign it. "You didn't even pause," he said. "Why would I pause?" she said. "Every word of it is true." She folded the document and set it aside for the return letter to read. "What I want to know is who the Colburn Trust's judge contact is." Reed mentions that the territorial court has been approached but doesn't specify who made the approach or to which judge's office. "Does it matter?" Caleb said. "It matters enormously," she said, "if they have a sympathetic judge already positioned. We need to know that before we file, not after. A motion in front of the wrong judge with a predetermined outcome is not a legal proceeding. It's a performance." Caleb looked at her steadily. "How do we find out?" "Reed will know how to find out," she said. "Write to him today. Ask him specifically which judge's clerk received the Colburn inquiry and when he wrote the letter that afternoon." Anna wrote 3 of her own, one to the Lindquist family, whose address Reed had finally provided, one to Martha Greer, asking for any additional information about Vane's current movements, and one to a name she had not mentioned to Caleb yet, because she was not certain it would come to anything, and she did not raise uncertain things until they became certain. The name was her father's old business acquaintance in Helena, a man named Croft, who had known Thomas Whitmore in the early days before the debt and the drought, when Thomas Whitmore was still a man people in the territorial capital took seriously. Croft was a retired judge. He knew the current court's personalities the way only retired members of a small legal community could from the inside, without the performance. She was not sure Croft would respond to a letter from Thomas Whitmore's daughter. She was not sure he was even still alive. But she sent the letter because the cost of sending it was low and the possible return was not. The days that followed had a different quality from the weeks before. The rhythms of the estate continued, cattle and timber and mine operations running as they always ran. Clara managing the household, Daniel moving through the property with his quiet, capable authority. But underneath the ordinary function of things was a current of tension that everyone on the property could feel even without knowing its source. Anna felt it most acutely in the evenings. The days had structure and purpose, and the specific comfort of work that was going somewhere. The evenings were less predictable. She and Caleb had fallen into a pattern of sitting together after supper, sometimes in the office going through documents, sometimes in the main room with the fire if the mountain evening turned cold. They talked about the case, and the property, and the workers, and the 100 practical things that needed managing. And sometimes they didn't talk about those things. On a Wednesday evening in the third week after Reed's letter, Caleb came in from the north pasture later than usual, and she heard him wash up and come through to the kitchen, where she was finishing a letter. And instead of going directly to the office, as he sometimes did, he sat down at the table and did not say anything. She finished the sentence she was writing. Then she looked up. He had the look of a man who had been out in the country with his own thoughts for too long. The specific, slightly raw quality that solitude produced when it went on past its useful point. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Long day, Caleb." He looked at her. "I rode out to the north fence line, where the boundary dispute sits." He paused. "There's a family on the Caldwell side, the family that's technically on disputed land. A woman and her 2 daughters. The father died 2 winters ago." "I didn't know that," Anna said. "Because I didn't tell you. I've been handling it. They pay what they can. I don't press them for the rest." He was quiet for a moment. "Today, the older girl came out while I was checking the fence. She's maybe 14. She asked me if the legal business with the property was going to mean they'd have to leave." Anna set down her pen. "Someone talked," she said. "Word gets around," he said. "Even up here. Especially up here." He looked at his hands. "I told her I was working on it and she should tell her mother not to worry. But I don't know that's true. If the Colburn Trust gets any traction on the boundary question as a secondary claim, that family's situation gets complicated very fast." Anna thought about this. She thought about Gerald Fitch with his leather satchel at the cemetery and the specific, practiced cruelty of people who used legal instruments against those who could not afford to defend themselves. She had entered this fight because it was her fight, because the Colburn Trust had made it personal in ways that touched her own marriage and her own standing. But sitting across from Caleb in the kitchen light, seeing in his face the weight of a 14-year-old girl asking if she would have to leave her home, she felt the shape of it shift into something larger. "We add the Caldwell boundary to Reed's brief," she said. "As part of the same petition, we ask the court to confirm the Hawthorne boundary claim formally and simultaneously establish the tenant family's right of occupancy under the existing rental arrangements. The Colburn Trust can't use the boundary dispute as a second front if it's already been adjudicated." Caleb looked at her. "That broadens the scope significantly. It also broadens the protection," she said. "This isn't only about the mine, you know that. It's about every family on this land. Every arrangement your father made, and every one you've made. The trust knows that too. It's why they chose this approach: go after the property rights at the root, and everything downstream falls." He was quiet for a long moment. "My father built this with the idea that land should serve the people on it. Not just the person who holds the title," he said. "He said that to me once, when I was young enough that I didn't fully understand what he meant." "You understood it," Anna said. "You've been living it for 8 years. He looked at her with that open quality in his face that still surprised her each time she saw it, because it was so different from the careful management he had shown her on the river road and in those first weeks. Like a man who had been slowly, carefully removing his own armor and was not entirely sure what the world would do with what was underneath. "Write to Reed," she said. "Tonight if you can. The fuller the petition, the stronger our position." He wrote the letter. She sat across from him and finished her own correspondence. And the kitchen was quiet in the particular way. It was quiet when two people were working in the same room and finding that the silence between them was not empty. Croft's letter arrived on a Friday. Anna read it alone in the office, standing at the desk rather than sitting, because she had opened it, expecting nothing useful, and had found something that changed the shape of everything. The retired judge knew precisely which clerk had received the Colburn inquiry, and the information he provided was not merely useful. It was the kind of information that, properly used, constituted a decisive advantage. The clerk in question was assigned to Judge Harmon Blaine. Blaine had two notable qualities, according to Croft, who wrote with the careful phrasing of a man who understood that letters could be read by people who were not their intended recipient. First, Blaine was known to be meticulous about procedural regularity. He did not favor parties who came to him having already worked the back channels, because he considered it an affront to the dignity of his court. Second, and more importantly, Blaine had 18 months earlier ruled against the Colburn Trust in a separate matter involving a land grant dispute in the Southern Valley, a ruling that Gerald Colburn's son had handled badly, publicly, in a way that had left bad feeling on both sides. The Colburn Trust had chosen the wrong judge. Whether through arrogance or through a miscalculation about their own influence in the territorial court system, they had put their preliminary inquiry through the clerk of a judge who already had reason to look at their filings with particular scrutiny and who valued procedural regularity above almost everything else. Which meant that the Hawthorne petition, filed cleanly and properly, and arriving before the Colburn formful claim, would land on a desk belonging to a judge who was predisposed to neither party, but who was specifically predisposed against the kind of back-channel approach the trust had been using. Anna read the letter twice. Then she went to find Caleb. He was in the stable with Daniel, going over a horse that had come up lame that morning. She came through the door, and both men looked up and saw her face, and Daniel quietly found something to do at the far end of the stable. Croft came through, she said. She told him. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was still for a moment. Blaine, he said. You know him? I appeared before him once, in Denver, on a case that touched territorial law. Caleb paused. He's a difficult judge to read in the room, but he's honest. Completely honest. The kind of honest that makes lawyers uncomfortable because you can't work any angle with him. That's exactly what we need, Anna said. Yes, Caleb said. He looked at her steadily. This letter from Croft. How did you get it? I wrote to him 3 weeks ago, she said. I wasn't certain he'd respond. I didn't mention it because I don't raise things I'm not sure of. A pause. You've been running this investigation in parallel this whole time. I've been gathering information, she said. Like I said. He shook his head slowly, and the motion was not negative. It was the motion of a man experiencing something he did not yet have the right words for. We need to get this to Reed immediately, she said. He should file the petition within the week, before the Colburn Trust completes whatever they're waiting for. I'll ride to Helena myself, Caleb said. Tomorrow morning. I can be there in 2 days. Take Daniel, she said. I'll stay here and manage the operation and keep working on the Lindquist documentation. The Lindquist family wrote back, I haven't told you yet. They have records. They kept everything. When did that come, he said. Yesterday, she said. Their original agreement with the trust. The modification they were presented with. The communications they received. It's a clear record of the trust's method. We can enter it as pattern evidence in our petition. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. You've been busy. I'm always busy, she said. Ride to Helena. Bring Reed everything. He left the next morning before dawn, as he said he would, with Daniel beside him, and the full packet of documentation that Anna had spent the previous evening organizing into the precise order that Reed would need to work from. She stood at the gate and watched them go, and then went back to the office and kept working. The 4 days Caleb was gone were the strangest of her time at the estate. Not difficult. She was not a woman who found solitude difficult. But the house had a different quality without him in it. and she noticed the difference in a way that was both new and inconvenient. Clara noticed her noticing. "He'll be back by Thursday," Clara said on the second morning. Without preamble, setting coffee in front of Anna at the kitchen table. "I'm not worried about that," Anna said. "No," Clara said. "You're just paying attention to something that isn't there." She went back to the stove. "That's different, I suppose." Anna decided not to respond to that. She threw herself into the work instead. She finished her analysis of the Lindquist documents and wrote a careful summary for Reed. She drafted responses to 2 of the ambiguous agreements from Caleb's father's era, proposing clarifying language that would remove the ambiguity without renegotiating the underlying terms. She met with the Caldwell family, the woman, whose name was Margaret, and her 2 daughters, and told them directly clearly, and without false comfort, that the legal proceedings would take time, but that their occupancies being specifically protected in the Hawthorne petition. Margaret Caldwell looked at her across the kitchen table of a small cabin that smelled of wood smoke and the particular combination of poverty and dignity that Anna recognized from her own childhood, and said, "Mr. Hawthorne never let us worry before. We didn't know whether to worry now." "Don't worry now either," Anna said. "We're handling it." Margaret looked at her with the assessing look of a woman who had survived enough to know the difference between a reassurance and a guarantee. Then she nodded once, as if she had decided the distinction didn't matter as much as the person delivering it. On the 4th day, in the late afternoon, Anna heard soldiers' footfall in the yard. She came out of the office and to the front of the house, and Caleb was coming through the gate on horseback. Alone, Daniel had peeled off to the east cottage, and he looked tired in the specific way that 2 days of mountain riding produced. But underneath the tiredness was something else, something that sat differently in his face than when he had left. "Well," she said. "Filed," he said. "Reed filed the petition this morning. Broad scope, full documentation, Lindquist pattern evidence included." He swung down from soldier. Blaine's clerk accepted it without comment. Reed says that's a good sign. Blaine's clerk turns away problematic filings at the door. He accepted ours. Anna let out a breath she had not been entirely aware she was holding. "And Reed says something else," Caleb said. He was standing a few feet from her, soldier's reins loose in his hand. "He heard through his contacts that the Colburn Trust got word of our filing before close of day." "They were not expecting it, no," Anna said. "They wouldn't have been. Aldrich, their lawyer, apparently made an inquiry about an emergency counter-filing and was told by Blaine's clerk that the judge would not entertain competing filings in rapid succession without specific cause shown. Meaning they can't just immediately answer with their own petition. They have to respond to ours." Caleb paused. "We're driving now." Not them. It was the first moment in the entire proceeding that felt like solid ground rather than moving terrain. Anna stood in the yard in the fading afternoon and felt it the particular, quiet satisfaction of a problem that had been fought towards solution and was beginning to yield. "Good," she said. Caleb looked at her. He had been looking at her since he came through the gate, with that different quality in his face. And now, with Soldier standing patient beside him, and the mountain evening coming down around them, and the estate settling into its end-of-day sounds, he kept looking. "Come inside," she said. "Clara will have kept supper." "In a minute," he said. She stopped. She turned back. He had not moved. He was standing with Soldier, and the late light on his face, and the expression that had no easy name. And he was looking at her with the fullness of it. Not managing it, not containing it, just letting her see it. "I rode 2 days and 2 nights," he said, "and most of what I thought about was getting back here." Anna stood very still. "Not the filing," he said, "not the case. Getting back here," he paused. To you, the yard was quiet. Behind him, the mountain held the last of the light, and around them, the estate sounds continued their ordinary rhythm, and neither of those things seemed to have anything to do with the space between 2 people standing 3 feet apart with everything that had been accumulating between them for months, taking up all the available air. "You should put Soldier away," Anna said. Her voice was steady. "Mostly." "I know," she said. She did know. She had known for some time, in the way she knew things by looking at the evidence and following where it led. even when where it led was somewhere she had not planned to go and could not entirely account for within the practical framework she had built for herself. "We should eat supper," she said. "And you should tell me everything," Reed said. "In order, so I can determine if there's anything we missed." "That isn't what I'm talking about," he said. "I know what you're talking about," she said, "and I'm not ready to talk about it in a yard." She held his gaze. "Come inside, Caleb." Something shifted in his face. The thing that had been trying to get out settled back, not suppressed. Just patient, like a man who understood timing well enough to read when something needed a different moment. "All right," he said. He took Soldier to the stable. She went inside and stood in the kitchen for a moment, with her hands flat on the table, feeling her own pulse, which was not entirely steady, which was inconvenient and also entirely honest. Clara looked at her from the stove, said nothing, began to plate the supper. Caleb came in 5 minutes later, and they sat at the table, and he told her everything Reed had said. In order, and she listened and asked questions, and they were back in the working rhythm that was their most natural mode together. But the thing he had said in the yard was present in the room with them, real and warm, and it did not go away over supper or over the documents they reviewed afterward in the office, or when the evening wound down and the house grew quiet. She was at the foot of the stairs when he said her name. She turned. He was in the hallway behind her. He had put down the last of the papers, and he was simply there, looking at her the way he had looked at her in the yard, without management or calculation. "I know what it costs you," he said. "To trust this. To trust me. After everything you came from and what I didn't tell you at the start." He stopped. "I know it isn't simple." "No," she said, "it isn't. I'm not asking for simple," he said. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like less than it is." "Try," she said. He was quiet for a moment, looking for the honest words rather than the easy ones, which was exactly how she had learned he worked when something mattered. "When I came to the river road," he said slowly, "I told myself I was looking for a practical arrangement. A partner. Someone who could share a life without the complications of what had happened before." He paused. "That's not what I found." Anna stood very still on the bottom stair. "What I found," he said, "was someone who walked into this place and looked at it clearly and decided it was worth working for. Not for what it was worth. For what it was." He held her gaze. "Someone who signed an affidavit without pausing, who wrote to a retired judge she wasn't even sure was alive, who went to a 14-year-old girl's mother and said, 'Don't worry. We're handling it.'" Another pause. "I watched you do all of that, and I kept thinking this is what I thought didn't exist. This is what I stopped believing in." The hallway was completely quiet. "Caleb, Anna," he said. "You're not ready." "I didn't say that," she said. He looked at her. "I said I wasn't ready to talk about it in a yard," she said. "That's different." The thing in his face opened all the way. She came down off the stair and crossed the hallway, and she put her hand against his jaw, the way you put your hand against something you have been wanting to touch for a long time and have finally decided you have the right to. And she looked up at him at close range, with the full force of what she had not let herself name until this moment. "You are the most complicated man I have ever met," she said. "I know," he said. "And the most honest," she said. "Eventually. Working on the eventually," he said. She almost smiled. He did smile, the real one, the one she had seen only 3 times in all the weeks since she arrived. The one that changed his whole face. She stood with her hand against his jaw and the weight of every practical and impractical thing that had brought them here. And she thought about the river road and all the impossible distances between that moment and this one. And she decided that the ledger balanced. Not perfectly. She had never believed in perfect ledgers, but soundly. Honestly. With both columns visible and nothing hidden. "The hearing will be in 6 weeks, she said. Her voice was almost entirely steady. "Yes," he said. His hand had come up to cover hers against his jaw. His thumb against her wrist, right over her pulse. "We have a great deal of work to do before then," she said. "We do," he said. Neither of them moved. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. and the mountain night held them there in the hallway of the house that was becoming a home. With 6 weeks of hard work ahead, and a fight that was not finished, and a future that was not guaranteed. And all of it was real, and none of it was simple, and it was, Anna Whitmore Hawthorne thought, exactly the ledger she had chosen. The 6 weeks before the hearing did not pass slowly. Anna had expected them to drag, had expected the waiting to be the hardest part. Space between the filing and the courtroom where there was nothing to do but prepare and wonder. She had been wrong. The 6 weeks were the most densely worked period of her life, including the hardest years on her father's farm, and they left no room for wondering because they left no room for anything that was not forward motion. Reed sent letters every 4 or 5 days. Each one contained new information about the Colburn Trust's positioning. Aldrich had filed a formal response to the Hawthorne petition, which Reed had expected, and had included in that response 2 things that were not expected. The first was a sworn statement from a man named Porter, a former territorial clerk, claiming to have witnessed a conversation in which Caleb Hawthorne had verbally misrepresented his financial standing to a prospective business partner. The second was a motion requesting that the court compel Anna to submit to a deposition regarding the circumstances of her marriage. She read both and felt the cold, specific anger she had learned to treat as useful rather than destructive. "Porter," she said to Caleb across the kitchen table. "Who is he?" "I know the name," Caleb said. "He clerked for the Territorial Land Office about 4 years ago. I had one interaction with him, a filing for the North Boundary documentation. He was incompetent. I reported the incompetence to his supervisor, and he lost the position. So he has reason to speak against you," Anna said. "He has reason to say whatever someone pays him to say," Caleb said flatly. "Then we find out who paid him," Anna said. She wrote to Reed that same evening, asking him to investigate Porter's current financial situation and any connections to Colburn business interests. She also told Reed she would submit to the deposition voluntarily, without waiting for the court to compel it. Caleb looked up when she said that. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." A woman who refuses a deposition looks like a woman with something to hide. A woman who walks into it without being forced looks like a woman with nothing to hide. Because she hasn't. She set down her pen. "Let them depose me. Let Aldrich sit across a table from me and ask me every question he has prepared, and I will answer every one of them." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not afraid of him." "I'm not afraid of people who use paper as a weapon," she said. "I know how paper works." The deposition was scheduled for 3 weeks before the hearing. In Helena, Anna rode down with Caleb and Reed, and she sat across a table from Aldrich, a careful, precise man of about 50 who had clearly spent the preceding weeks preparing his questions, and she answered everything he asked with the direct, unhurried clarity of a woman who had nothing to manage because she was telling the truth. Aldrich asked about the River Road meeting. She described it accurately and completely. He asked about what representations Caleb had made about his financial standing. She told him exactly what Caleb had said. "I have what I need, and I can handle the debt." And she told him she had understood this to be an understatement from a man rather than a deceptive claim. And she explained precisely why she had concluded that, based on the evidence available to her at the time. He asked when she had first understood the full scope of her husband's assets. She told him the evening of their arrival at the estate, approximately 2 days after the marriage was contracted. He asked whether she felt she had been deceived. She looked at him steadily across the table. "I felt I had married a man who was more private than forthcoming," she said. "Those are different things. A man who does not volunteer information is not the same as a man who lies. I was given the opportunity to make inquiries before the marriage, and I made them. I was given the opportunity to leave after I saw the full picture, and I chose not to. I am here today as a willing participant in this marriage and in this legal proceeding. If there is a version of deception in that sequence, I would like you to show it to me, because I have looked carefully and I cannot find it." Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Then he moved to his next question. Reed told her afterward. Walking out of the building into the Helena Street, that it was the cleanest deposition testimony he had heard in 30 years of practice. "You didn't give him a single usable thread," Reed said. "There weren't any to give," Anna said. They rode back to the estate the next day. And Anna turned her attention to the Porter problem, because that was the thread she could not leave loose. Reed's inquiry into Porter had returned something interesting. Porter had opened a bank account in Helena 6 weeks earlier, shortly after the Colburn Trust had begun assembling their formal response, and had deposited an amount that was substantially beyond anything a former territorial clerk without current employment could explain through ordinary means. The deposit had come from a Helena commercial account that traced, through 2 intermediate entities, to a holding company with Colburn family connections. It was not proof. It was not the kind of clean documentary evidence that could be entered directly. But it was enough to work with. "We don't need to prove he was paid," Anna said to Reed, sitting in his Helena office on the last day of their trip. "We need to create the question in the judge's mind. Show Blaine the bank record. Show him the timing. Show him the Colburn connection 2 steps back. And let him draw the conclusion himself." She paused. A judge who values procedural regularity is also a judge who values the integrity of sworn testimony. If he believes Porter's statement was purchased, he will weight it accordingly. Reed looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. "You've thought about this carefully." "I've thought about very little else. For 3 weeks," she said. "Your father was a farmer," Reed said. "My father was a man who taught his daughter how numbers worked," she said. "The rest I figured out myself." Reed almost smiled. He entered the Porter Bank information into the petition as supporting material with careful, precise language that raised the question without overstating the evidence. Exactly as Anna had suggested. They went home. The 2 weeks remaining before the hearing had a specific quality that Anna would later find difficult to describe. Not calm, not tense exactly, but something between the two, like the air before weather that hasn't arrived yet. She and Caleb worked through everything a final time. Every document, every argument, every possible question Aldrich might raise from the Colburn side. They sat at the kitchen table until late every night, and they ate breakfast early every morning, and in between those 2 anchors, they built the most complete and defensible version of their position that 2 people and 1 attorney could construct. And in the spaces between the work, something else was being built too. It was quieter than the legal preparation. It did not have documents or strategy or clear forward motion. It had instead the particular texture of 2 people who had stopped performing at each other and had started simply being in the same place at the same table, on the same land, in the same house, with the ease that came from having gone through enough difficulty together that pretense had become impossible. She found him one morning standing in the kitchen before she came down, reading one of her father's books that she had brought from the farm and left on the shelf in the main room. He did not hear her on the stairs, and she stood for a moment, watching him read the specific way he turned the page. The slight movement of his lips, sometimes when something caught his attention, and she thought about the river road, and about the woman who had arrived at this place, believing she was making a practical arrangement. And she felt something in her chest that was warm and complicated and entirely certain. She went into the kitchen and started the coffee, and he looked up when he heard her and said, "Your father had good taste in books," and she said, "He did," and that was all, but it was enough. The night before the hearing, neither of them slept much. She knew he was awake because she could hear him moving in the room at the end of the hall, not pacing. Caleb was not a pacer, but the small sounds of a man lying still and not finding rest. She lay in her own room and stared at the ceiling and went through everything, one more time. Every argument, every document, every answer she had prepared. And then she got up and went to the hallway and knocked on his door. He opened it almost immediately. He was dressed, which meant he had given up on sleep entirely and had simply been waiting for the night to finish. She looked at him. "Come downstairs," she said. "I'll make coffee." They sat at the kitchen table in the dark before dawn, with their coffee and the quiet of a house that was holding its breath along with them. And Caleb said, "Tell me honestly, what do you think the outcome is?" "I think we win," Anna said. "Not because we're right, though we are, because we built a better case than they did. And we built it earlier, and we built it in front of the right judge." She paused. "I think Blaine looks at the Porter bank record and writes off that testimony entirely. I think the Lindquist pattern evidence establishes the trusts method clearly enough that the court sees the Hawthorne claim as defensive rather than aggressive. And I think the affidavit kills the marriage validity argument before it leaves Aldrich's mouth. And if I'm wrong about Blaine," Caleb said. "You're not wrong about him," she said. "But if you were, we appeal. And we keep appealing until we find a judge who reads documents rather than relationships." She looked at him across the table. "I did not come this far to stop." He held her gaze. "No," he said. "I know you didn't. They rode to Helena in the morning. The territorial courthouse was a solid stone building that had been built to convey permanence, which Anna found either reassuring or irritating depending on what was happening inside it. Today, she found it reassuring. She wanted permanence. She wanted the weight of a real institution behind the thing she was about to argue. Reed met them on the steps. He had the careful, controlled energy of an attorney on a hearing day, all the anxiety compressed into a small, hard thing that would not interfere with function. "Aldrich is already inside," Reed said. He brought 2 associates. "He's planning to make the marriage validity argument formally in the opening statement." "Good," Anna said. "Then we address it first." Reed looked at her. "I'm presenting opening, I know," she said. "But address it first." He nodded. They went inside. Judge Blaine was exactly as Croft's letter had suggested, a man of about 65, with a face that revealed nothing and eyes that missed nothing, who ran his courtroom with the precise, unhurried authority of someone who had sat in that chair long enough to have seen every kind of performance and had stopped finding any of them impressive. He looked at the parties assembled before him, read the petition in front of him for what was clearly not the first time, and said, "Counselors, I've reviewed the filings. I have questions. But we'll begin with opening statements." Mr. Reed opened by addressing the marriage validity argument directly. He stated plainly, with the affidavit entered as exhibit, that Anna Hawthorne had full knowledge of her husband's circumstances and stood as a willing, informed partner. He stated that the court would find, in the deposition transcript also entered as exhibit, that the opposing party's own deposition of Mrs. Hawthorne had failed to produce a single statement supporting a claim of marital deception. Then he turned to the primary claim, the original agreement's fulfillment, and laid out the documentary record with the systematic clarity that Anna had helped him build over 6 weeks of preparation. When Aldrich rose to present the Colburn position, he was already working from a narrower space than he had entered the room with. He made the marriage validity argument anyway. Blaine let him finish. Then Blaine looked down at his papers and said, without looking up, "Counselor, I have in front of me a deposition transcript in which Mrs. Hawthorne provides a precise, detailed, and internally consistent account of her marriage's formation and her subsequent understanding of her husband's affairs. I also have a signed affidavit to the same effect. Is the Colburn position that this court should discount the testimony of the party you yourselves chose to depose?" A pause in the courtroom. "The position is that the original representations Aldrich began. Made on a river road," Blaine said, "to a woman who, by her own account, subsequently conducted independent inquiries before agreeing to the marriage. Counselor, the threshold for invalidating a marriage on grounds of deception requires material misrepresentation relied upon without reasonable opportunity to investigate. The record before me suggests she investigated." He set down the paper. "Move on." Anna sat beside Reed and did not allow her face to change. But she felt it, the specific, physical sensation of a weight she had been carrying for 6 weeks shifting off her shoulders. Aldrich moved on. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Blaine asked sharp, precise questions of both sides, the kind of questions that told you a man had read every document in front of him and was testing whether the people presenting them had read them equally carefully. Reed answered every question completely. Aldrich answered some of them less completely, particularly the questions about Porter's testimony. And when Blaine asked Aldrich directly about the bank account and the timing of the deposit, The silence that preceded Aldrich's response lasted long enough to be significant. The source of Mr. Porter's financial circumstances is not a matter before this court, Aldrich said carefully. The credibility of his testimony is, Blaine said. Which is why I raised it. He made a note. He did not comment further. He did not need to. At the end of the 4 hours, Blaine said he would take the matter under advisement and deliver his ruling within 10 days. He closed the session and left the bench, and the room exhaled. Reed turned to Caleb and Anna. That went about as well as it could go, he said. The Porter moment, Anna said. Yes, Reed said. Blaine will disregard that testimony entirely. I'd stake my license on it. They ate supper in Helena that night, at a restaurant on the main street that was more formal than anywhere Anna had eaten since leaving the valley. And she sat across from Caleb in the lamplight, and felt the strange, suspended quality of a moment that was after effort and before outcome, the particular breath between the doing and the knowing. Caleb reached across the table and put his hand over hers. He did not say anything. She did not move her hand away. The ruling came in 8 days, not 10. Reed's rider reached the estate on a Thursday morning when Anna was in the office, and Caleb was out with the cattle. She read the document once, standing at the desk, and then she walked out to the yard and sent one of the hands to find Caleb and tell him to come in. He came in from the north pasture at a canter and swung down before Soldier had fully stopped, which was not how Caleb Hawthorne normally moved, and she understood that the 8 days of waiting had cost him more than he had shown. She held up the document. His eyes went to her face first. Not the document. We won, she said. He stood in the yard with the reins in his hand and the mountain morning around him, and something moved through his face that she had not seen before, not the careful controlled opening she had learned to read, but something larger, something that came from the place where 8 years of building in isolation and the long work of the past months and the whole weight of what had been at stake came through, all at once. Briefly before he pulled it back, but she saw it. She crossed the yard and handed him the document, and he read it, all of it. Carefully, the way he read everything, and when he looked up again his face was composed. But his eyes were not. Blaine confirmed the original agreement's fulfillment in full, she said. He dismissed the marriage validity argument with explicit language. He found the modified contract copy to be, and I'm quoting, inconsistent with the documented chain of custody and without evidentiary foundation. Porter's testimony he described as insufficient and improperly substantiated. She paused. And he added a notation unusual for him. Reed says requesting that the Territorial Attorney General's office review the Colburn Trust's conduct in the matter and in the prior 2 similar proceedings. Caleb was very still. They're not just beaten, Anna said, they're under review. The Lindquist family's situation. The other family. Blaine read the pattern, and he put it on the record. The silence in the yard was the good kind, the kind that had room in it. The Caldwell family, Caleb said. Protected explicitly in the ruling, Anna said. All tenant occupancies under existing Hawthorne arrangements are confirmed. He wrote it in as a matter of record. Caleb looked down at the document in his hands. Then he looked up at the mountains and the sky above the valley and the land that was his, that he had built and that had just been confirmed as his by a court and a judge who could not be bought. And then he looked at her. Come, he said. His voice was quiet. She crossed the remaining yard between them, and he put his arms around her. Properly, fully, the way you hold someone when ceremony is finished, and what remains is the simple truth of 2 people who have chosen each other past the point where the choosing was easy, or safe, or practical. She put her face against his shoulder and let herself feel the full weight of 6 months, the river road and the debt and the gate and the mansion and the documents and the deposition and the courtroom, all of it settling into the ground beneath them like something that had needed to fall and had finally finished falling. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then she said, into his shoulder, I need to write to Reed, he laughed. It was the real laugh. She had heard it only twice before. It was a good sound. You need to write to Reed, he said. He needs to know the ruling's been received, she said. He sent the ruling, Anna. He already knows. I need to thank him properly. Tomorrow, Caleb said. She lifted her head. She looked at him at close range. This man she had met on a river road when she had $47 and a failing farm and a debt she could not pay and a life that was being decided for her by people who had no right to decide it. This man who had sat still on his horse and told her the truth in the way that was honest even when it was incomplete. Who had handed her a key on a watch chain and let her open a locked drawer. Who had ridden 2 days to Helena and come back thinking about getting home to her. Tomorrow, she agreed. The news spread through the valley the way news spread in that country, not through any single announcement, but through the specific, reliable network of people who knew each other's business and whose business this had been since Preston Vance rode up the mountain road on a fine bay horse and left with less than he arrived with. The Lindquist family wrote a letter that arrived 2 weeks after the ruling. It was a short letter, plainly worded, from a woman who had spent 18 months watching what a legal instrument in bad hands had done to her family, and what it said was simply, "Thank you, and God bless whoever thought to put the pattern on the record." Because there are families in this territory who needed someone to do that. Anna read it at the kitchen table and set it down without saying anything. Clara, across the room, did not ask about it. Some things did not need commentary. Daniel gathered the property workers the following Sunday, not formally, without announcement, and stood in the yard and told them what had been confirmed and what it meant for everyone who lived and worked on Hawthorne land. He said it straightforwardly, without theater. When he finished, the oldest of the ranch hands, a man named Pete, who had worked the property longer than anyone except Daniel himself, said, "We always figured she'd hold," and Daniel said, "She held." And that was the end of it. Caleb told Anna what Pete had said that evening. "He meant the land," Anna said. "I think he meant more than that," Caleb said. She thought about it. "Both, maybe." "Yes," Caleb said. "Both." They renegotiated the Langley timber contract the following month, which came in 32% above the previous terms, and which Langley accepted without significant objection, because Anna had been right. They needed the Hawthorne volume more than they needed to win a negotiation. Reed finalized the 2 ambiguous agreements from Caleb's father's era, adding clarifying language that removed the vulnerability without altering the underlying relationships. The north boundary question was formally resolved by survey and filing, with a clear title drawn around the Caldwell family's land that meant no one could use the dispute as leverage again. The Copper survey went forward through winter and into the spring. Caleb hired a team he trusted, paid them well, required discretion, and the results confirmed what the earlier surveys had suggested. The deposit was real. It was large. It was, in the specific language of the lead surveyor's report, one of the most significant finds in the territory in the past decade. Caleb told Anna in the office, the evening the final report arrived, reading the relevant sections to her across the desk in the lamplight. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do with it?" she said. He looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's your decision how to proceed," she said. "Development requires capital and partners and a level of outside involvement that changes the nature of this place. I want to know what you want." He set down the report. He thought about it the way he thought about things that mattered, slowly. Honestly, without the performance of having an opinion before he had actually formed one. "I want to develop it in a way that benefits the families on this land first," he said. "Employment, fair wages, a share of the output that goes back into this community." He paused. "I want to do it without becoming something different from what we already are." "That's possible," Anna said. "It requires the right structure. I can build it." "I know you can," he said. Without hesitation, without qualification, she looked at him across the desk in the lamplight of the office that had been his alone for 8 years and was now simply theirs, in the way that the kitchen was theirs, and the decisions were theirs, and the land was theirs. And she thought about the woman who had stood at an empty farmhouse door with a bag in her hand and chosen north. She had come north looking for survival. She had arrived at something she could not have designed because it required 2 people and she had not known the second person existed until a man on a gray horse had pulled up on a river road and told her the truth in the careful, incomplete way of someone who was trying to be honest and was not yet sure how much honesty was safe. Now she knew exactly how much. All of it. Every word. Every document. Every room in a mansion she had arrived at believing it was a cabin. Every argument made and won. Every morning at the kitchen table, and every evening with the mountain quiet around them, and the work between them and the thing that was not work. The thing that had no ledger entry because it did not need one. She reached across the desk and picked up her pen. "I'll start on the structure tomorrow," she said. Caleb smiled. "The real one, of course you will," he said. Outside, the mountain held the last of the evening light the way it always did, longer than the valley below. The high altitude catching what the lower country had already released, and the estate settled into its nighttime sounds. Horses and wind and the distant creek, the sounds that had been there before she arrived and had not changed, except that now they contained her too, as naturally and completely as if she had always been part of them. She had come north with a debt and a name and $47 and the absolute refusal to be decided for. She had built something worth more than any of them. Not the copper under the mountain, not the confirmed title and the legal victory and the contracts renegotiated on fair terms. Something that had no survey and no price, and could not be put in a petition, or entered as exhibit, or confirmed by any judge in any territorial courthouse. She had built a life that was entirely, undeniably, irreversibly hers. And the man across the desk, who had come to a river road because he had heard about a woman who said no when everyone told her to say yes, had built it with her. That was the whole of it. That was the truth of it. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.